I never imagined my family would be the ones to destroy me. At 54 years old, with a career built on precision and a reputation earned through decades of meticulous work, I had spent my professional life uncovering financial fraud for corporations and law firms across the eastern seaboard. The courtroom hearing for my late brother's estate had been one of many legal proceedings I expected to navigate with quiet competence. My name is Sebastian Hawthorne, and what I discovered during the months leading to that hearing exposed a betrayal that had been orchestrated in plain sight, hidden beneath decades of family dinners and holiday gatherings. The Probate Court of Montgomery County is located in downtown Philadelphia, housed in a granite building where inheritance disputes and guardianship cases are decided with clinical detachment. The facility processes hundreds of estate hearings each year across multiple courtrooms, settling family conflicts that range from simple disagreements to complex financial battles. The morning docket from 9 a.m. to noon handles routine matters with straightforward documentation. The afternoon session from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. typically addresses contested cases where families cannot agree on terms. My preparation had consisted of 3 months of systematic investigation following my brother Frederick's death in March 2024. Frederick Hawthorne, my elder brother by 6 years, had been a meticulous estate planner who documented everything with the precision of someone who understood that clarity prevents conflict. He had worked as a wealth management consultant for over 35 years, and his final wishes were expressed in explicit detail across multiple legal instruments. This hearing isn't really about the money, my attorney Victor Lane had told me during our final preparation meeting the night before. Your family is challenging your competence to manage your own affairs. If they succeed, everything Frederick left you, and potentially your own assets, could be placed under conservatorship. The estate administration process itself is more complex than most people realize. Modern probate proceedings require extensive documentation, verification of testamentary capacity, confirmation of proper execution, and examination of any challenges to validity. Before distribution, executors must conduct thorough accountings, settle outstanding debts, and address any claims against the estate. Before the hearing, I conducted my own investigation. I verified financial transactions through bank statements and investment records. I examined the timeline of my brother's declining health against unusual account activity. I confirmed the authenticity of legal documents that had supposedly granted certain family members financial authority. I identified patterns that professional investigators might have missed. My first 3 interactions with opposing counsel had been routine. Standard discovery requests, predictable interrogatories, and procedural motions that revealed nothing unusual about their strategy. The documentation they submitted appeared legitimate, affidavits from family members, character references, and medical opinions questioning my judgment. By the morning of the hearing, I had successfully compiled evidence that contradicted their entire narrative, though I had shared none of it with anyone except Victor. The courtroom was scheduled to hear 4 contested matters that day. Mine was the final case, set for 2:30 p.m. According to the docket, the matter involved a dispute over testamentary capacity and executor fitness in the estate of Frederick James Hawthorne, deceased. The petitioners were my uncle Howard Hawthorne, my aunt Margaret Sutton, and my cousin Clara Whitmore, all of whom had filed jointly to challenge my appointment. The allegations appeared carefully constructed, a pattern of impulsive behavior, documented instances of poor judgment, medical records suggesting emotional instability, and financial decisions that demonstrated unfitness to manage substantial assets. Everything seemed designed to dismantle my credibility before I could speak a single word in my own defense. If you've ever faced betrayal from those closest to you, subscribe to follow what happens next. Like, comment, and share if this story resonates. Your support means everything. Now, to understand how I ended up in that courtroom, facing people I'd shared holidays and memories with for over 5 decades, you need to understand who Frederick was, and what he meant to our family. Frederick Hawthorne died on March 15, 2024, at the age of 60, in his sleep, in the bedroom of the brownstone he'd lived in for 30 years. The official cause was cardiac arrhythmia, sudden and without warning, though he'd been managing a minor heart condition for years. When I got the call from his housekeeper that morning, my first thought wasn't about inheritance or estates. It was about the fact that my brother, the one person in our family who'd always made sense, was gone. Frederick and I had never been especially close in the traditional sense. He was 6 years older, which meant we'd grown up in different eras of our family's dysfunction. By the time I was old enough to have real conversations, he was already in college. But as adults, we developed a quiet understanding. He valued precision. I valued evidence. We both understood that clarity was a form of respect. He'd spent 35 years as a wealth management consultant, building portfolios for clients who trusted him with generational wealth. His own finances reflected that same discipline, every account documented, every investment justified, every decision recorded in the leather-bound ledger he kept in his study. Frederick didn't leave things to chance, and he certainly didn't leave things to interpretation. I'd built my own career as a forensic accountant, the kind of work that teaches you to see patterns others miss. Corporate fraud investigations, embezzlement cases, asset tracing for divorce attorneys, my job was to follow money through layers of obfuscation until the truth emerged. Frederick had always been proud of that, in his understated way. "You see what people try to hide," he'd told me once. "That's a rare skill." Our family had never quite understood either of us. We were too quiet, too methodical, too unwilling to engage in the drama that seemed to fuel everyone else's interactions. Frederick had been the responsible older brother, the one who'd managed our parents' estates after they passed. I'd been the distant younger brother, the one who showed up for holidays but rarely stayed long. That distance had bred resentment over the years. Howard, our father's younger brother, had always resented Frederick's financial success. Margaret, our aunt, had never forgiven Frederick for refusing to loan her money for a failed business venture in the 1990s. Clara, her daughter, had grown up hearing stories about how Frederick and I thought we were better than everyone else. The will reading took place 2 weeks after Frederick's funeral, in the conference room of his attorney's office. The document was quintessentially Frederick, clear, detailed, and impossible to misinterpret. He'd left specific bequests to various family members, $50,000 to Howard, $30,000 to Margaret, smaller amounts to cousins and distant relatives. The bulk of his estate, valued at approximately $4.2 million, he'd left to me, with a letter explaining that he trusted my judgment and discretion. The shift in the room was immediate. Not dramatic, our family was too practiced at maintaining appearances for that. But I noticed the glances exchanged between Howard and Margaret, the way Clara's expression hardened, the sudden chill in voices that had been warm with condolence just moments before. "That's quite a responsibility," Howard had said, his tone careful. "Managing that much money. Frederick always was confident in your abilities, even when others had questions." It was a subtle thing, the way he phrased it. Not an accusation, just an observation. But I recognized it immediately, the same narrative that had followed me through family gatherings for years. Sebastian is impulsive. Sebastian makes rash decisions. Sebastian can't be trusted with important matters. I'd always dismissed it as family noise, the kind of petty resentment that festers in any large family. But sitting in that conference room, watching the subtle recalibration of relationships in real time, I understood something else was happening. This wasn't about grief. It was about control. That night, I began reviewing Frederick's financial records, not because I suspected anything, but because it was what I did. Documentation was comfort, and I needed to understand exactly what I was responsible for. The accounts were organized exactly as I'd expected: investment portfolios, real estate holdings, retirement accounts, all meticulously maintained. Then I noticed it. A withdrawal from Frederick's primary checking account, dated 6 weeks before his death. $25,000, transferred to an account I didn't recognize. The notation simply read, "Family Assistance, Authorized." Frederick never used vague language in his financial records. Every transaction in his ledger had specific details, names, purposes, justifications. This entry had none of that. I stared at the screen for several minutes, my training warring with my instinct to give my brother the benefit of the doubt. It could be legitimate. It probably was legitimate. But something in my gut told me not to ask about it. Not yet. I closed the laptop and made a decision that would define everything that followed. I would say nothing to anyone until I understood exactly what I was looking at. The first rule of forensic accounting is simple: follow the money, but never follow it alone. A single irregular transaction means nothing. 2 might be coincidence. 3 begins to form a pattern. 4 demands explanation. I spent the next 2 weeks reconstructing Frederick's financial activity for the 18 months preceding his death. Not just the major accounts, everything. Credit card statements, utility payments, automatic transfers, even the small cash withdrawals he made weekly for household expenses. Frederick's meticulous record-keeping made the work straightforward, but what I found made it necessary. Forensic accountants don't think like auditors. Auditors verify that numbers match paperwork. We verify that numbers match behavior. A person's financial patterns are as distinctive as their handwriting: consistent, predictable, revealing. When those patterns break, something has changed. Either the person's circumstances shifted, or someone else is making decisions. Frederick's spending had been remarkably consistent for years. Monthly transfers to his housekeeper, quarterly payments to his investment advisor, annual property tax payments that never varied by more than a few $100s. His withdrawal patterns were equally stable: $500 in cash every Friday, small charitable donations on the first of each month, predictable online purchases that matched his hobbies. Then, starting in September 2022, irregularities appeared. The first was the $25,000 transfer I'd already noticed. Then I found another, $18,500 in November 2022, notation reading, Emergency Family Support, Clara. A third in January 2023, $12,000, marked simply as, Urgent Request, Howard Approval. Frederick never abbreviated. He never left details vague. And he certainly never described anything as, urgent, without explaining why. I cross-referenced the dates with Frederick's personal calendar, which he'd kept digitally and backed up to cloud storage. September 14, 2022, the day of the first transfer, showed a notation: Clara visit, 2 p.m. to 4 p.m. November 8, 2022, Howard stopped by, discussed estate planning. January 19, 2023, Margaret plus Clara, afternoon tea. Every irregular withdrawal occurred within 48 hours of a family visit. I found myself working late into the night, the kind of focused investigation that had built my career. No emotional reaction, no premature conclusions, just methodical documentation of facts. I created spreadsheets tracking every family interaction against every unusual transaction. The correlation was undeniable. But correlation isn't causation. I needed evidence, not suspicion. Frederick's handwritten ledger provided the next piece. He'd kept physical records alongside digital ones, a redundancy that seemed excessive until I understood its purpose. The ledger entries for these transactions were different from his usual precise notations. The handwriting was Frederick's, but the phrasing was constrained, almost careful: signed authorization for temporary access, Clara present. Approved emergency transfer, documentation provided by Howard. These weren't explanations. They were justifications written by someone who felt compelled to document decisions he wasn't entirely comfortable making. I maintained absolute silence about my findings. Not to Victor, not to Frederick's attorney, not even to the housekeeper who'd worked for my brother for 15 years. My professional rule had always been ironclad: never accuse without certainty. Suspicion destroys relationships. Evidence creates accountability. The breakthrough came at 2:47 a.m. on a Thursday in late April, 3 weeks after the will reading. I was reviewing scanned copies of documents from Frederick's estate files when I found it, a notarized power of attorney form, dated October 2022, granting Clara Whitmore limited financial authority over Frederick's accounts, in case of medical incapacity or emergency. The document appeared legitimate at first glance. Proper formatting, official seal, witness signatures. But something felt wrong. I pulled up the state licensing database and searched for the notary's commission number. The record loaded slowly, my pulse quickening with each second of delay. The notary's commission had expired in June 2022, 4 months before the document was supposedly notarized. I sat back from my desk, the implications settling over me like cold water. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't an oversight. Someone had created a legal document using an expired notary seal, which meant someone had either forged the document entirely or had convinced a notary to backdate their work. Either way, I was looking at a document that should not exist. And if this document was fraudulent, how many others were there? Notarization exists for a single purpose, to create an independent verification that a signature is genuine and that the signer understood what they were signing. It's not ceremonial. It's not optional for certain legal documents. It's the thin line between a legitimate authorization and actionable fraud. The expired notary commission wasn't a technicality, it invalidated the entire document. I spent the next 48 hours examining the power of attorney form with the methodical scrutiny I'd applied to corporate fraud cases worth millions. The paper stock was correct for the period. The formatting matched standard legal templates. The signatures appeared consistent with Frederick's hand. But beneath the surface legitimacy, fractures appeared. The witness signatures belonged to two people, Margaret Sutton and a name I didn't recognize, David Chen. I cross-referenced Chen against Frederick's contacts, his professional network, even his social media connections. Nothing. The man had apparently witnessed a legal document for my brother but left no other trace of their relationship. When I searched Chen's name in the state business registry, I found something more interesting. He was listed as a registered agent for a limited liability company established in Delaware in 2021. The company's name was Whitmore Family Holdings, LLC. Clara's surname wasn't coincidence. The notary commission issue was provable. The witness discrepancy was suggestive. Together, they transformed a family dispute into something that required legal expertise beyond my own. I called Victor Lane on a Monday morning in early May. Victor had handled estate litigation for 20 years, building a reputation for precision and discretion. Frederick had mentioned him once, years ago, as someone who understood that the law was about leverage, not volume. "I need to show you something," I told him during our first meeting. "But before I do, I need to know, if I've discovered potential fraud in estate documents, what's my obligation?" Victor studied me across his desk, his expression unchanged. "Your obligation is to protect the estate and ensure proper administration. If you have evidence of fraud, we document it, verify it, and present it to the court. But Sebastian," he leaned forward slightly, "once you make that accusation, there's no walking it back. You need to be absolutely certain." I slid the power of attorney document across the desk. Victor's examination took less than 3 minutes. He didn't speak, just pulled up the same notary database I'd checked, verified the commission expiration, and set the document down carefully. "Do they know you have this?" he asked. "No one knows I've been investigating anything." "Good. Keep it that way." Victor's tone shifted into what I recognized as strategic mode. "Right now, they think they're winning. People who believe they're winning get confident. Confident people make mistakes." Over the next month, I continued my investigation in complete silence while my family's legal team filed their petition challenging my executor appointment. Their argument was straightforward: I lacked the emotional stability and judgment to manage a multi-million-dollar estate. They submitted affidavits, character references, even medical records from a brief period of depression I'd experienced after my divorce 15 years earlier. I attended depositions, answered questions minimally, and revealed nothing. Meanwhile, I found more irregularities. The $25,000 transfer from September 2022 had gone to an account registered to a business called Sutton Consulting Services, Margaret's company, which according to state records had been administratively dissolved in 2020 for failure to file taxes. The money had then been transferred in smaller increments to personal accounts belonging to both Margaret and Howard. The $18,500 November transfer had followed a similar pattern, routed through an account that existed for exactly 47 days before being closed. These weren't simple family loans. They were structured transfers designed to obscure the destination of funds. Someone understood exactly how to move money in ways that wouldn't trigger automatic fraud detection. I expanded my investigation beyond Clara, Howard, and Margaret. Frederick's ledger mentioned other names, cousins who'd visited, family friends who'd helped with paperwork, even his former financial advisor who'd retired unexpectedly in early 2023. The pattern that emerged was more complex than simple theft. Multiple people had been involved, each playing specific roles. Some made requests. Others prepared documentation. A few simply provided cover by their presence during key transactions. As the hearing date approached, my family's confidence became almost palpable. They filed supplemental declarations describing my supposed instability with increasing detail. They requested psychological evaluation. They even suggested that my obsessive focus on minor financial details was evidence of compulsive behavior unsuitable for estate management. That's when I understood the real strategy. The accusations against me weren't the attack. They were the smokescreen. While the court focused on my alleged incompetence, no one was looking at what had actually happened to Frederick's estate. The louder they shouted about my unfitness, the less attention anyone paid to the systematic draining of accounts that had begun long before Frederick died. They weren't trying to win the estate. They were trying to make sure no one examined it closely enough to see what they'd already taken. The deposition took place in a windowless conference room at the opposing counsel's office on a Thursday afternoon in late June. Their attorney, a man named Richard Brennan who specialized in contested estates, had arranged the furniture to create maximum psychological pressure, his client seated along one wall, me isolated at the far end of the table, a court reporter position between us like a referee. "Mr. Hawthorne," Brennan began, his tone professionally sympathetic, "would you describe your relationship with your brother as close?" "We had mutual respect," I answered. "But not close." I answered your question. Victor had prepared me for this. Depositions aren't about truth, they're about creating quotes that sound damaging when read in isolation. Every additional word I offered was potential ammunition. So I gave them nothing beyond what was asked. Brennan shifted tactics. "Your family has expressed concern about certain incidents from your past. The dissolution of your marriage in 2009, for instance. Would you say that was a stable period in your life?" "I was divorced." "Many people are." "But you sought treatment for depression afterward, correct?" "I spoke with a therapist." "Yes." "For how long?" 6 months. "And during that time, were you prescribed medication?" I paused, meeting his eyes directly. "Briefly. As recommended by a physician." "Is there a question about my brother's estate, or are we discussing my medical history from 15 years ago?" Across the table, I watched Clara exchange a glance with Howard. Small, satisfied, confident. They thought they were winning. Brennan continued for another 90 minutes, probing every difficult moment from my past, a failed business partnership in my 30s, a period of unemployment during the 2008 recession, even a credit card debt I'd carried briefly after my divorce. Each question was designed to build a narrative of instability, poor judgment, and financial irresponsibility. I answered each one with minimal precision, offering no explanations, no justifications, no emotional reactions. "You seem very controlled, Mr. Hawthorne," Brennan observed near the end. "Some might say detached. Do you find it difficult to express emotion?" "I find it unnecessary to perform emotion for your benefit." Victor coughed softly, his signal that I was close to saying too much. I returned to silence. What struck me most during the deposition wasn't Brennan's questions. It was my family's behavior. Margaret couldn't help smiling when Brennan mentioned my divorce. Howard nodded along with each accusation as though confirming facts he'd long known. Clara took notes, her expression a mixture of concern and vindication. They were presenting a narrative, a story about a troubled younger brother who'd never quite succeeded, who'd always been slightly unstable, who couldn't be trusted with responsibility. And they were telling that story without a single document, financial record, or verifiable fact to support it. Their entire strategy relied on emotion replacing evidence. The contrast became even clearer during their own depositions. When Victor questioned Howard about his visits to Frederick in 2022 and 2023, Howard's answers were expansive, filled with details about Frederick's declining health and increasing confusion. He was forgetting things, Howard testified. Repeating himself. I was concerned about his mental state. Did you document these concerns? Victor asked. I mentioned them to family members. Did you speak with his physician? I assumed someone else had. Did you create any written record of Frederick's alleged confusion? No, but it was obvious to anyone who spent time with him. Victor moved to the next topic without pressing. Let them talk. Let them build their story without foundation. Clara's deposition revealed similar patterns. She described numerous conversations with Frederick where he'd allegedly expressed doubts about my judgment, my stability, my ability to handle responsibility. When Victor asked for dates, she provided vague time frames. When he asked if she documented any of these conversations, she said they'd been casual family discussions, not formal meetings. But you remember them clearly enough to testify about them? Victor asked. Of course. They were concerning. Concerning enough to document? I didn't think documentation was necessary at the time. Margaret's deposition was the most revealing. She testified that Frederick had asked her to help manage certain financial matters during his final months, that he'd signed documents giving her limited authority, that everything had been done with his full knowledge and consent. Do you still have copies of those authorization documents? Victor asked. I believe they were filed with the estate paperwork. We haven't located them. Can you describe them? Margaret's description matched the forged power of attorney almost exactly, right down to the notary seal and witness signatures. She just confirmed, under oath, that she knew about a document that shouldn't exist. Victor caught my eye across the table, his expression unchanged. But I knew what he was thinking. They just locked themselves into a story we could disprove. The final deposition concluded in early July. 2 weeks later, we received notice that Judge Eleanor Prescott had scheduled the evidentiary hearing for August 12 at 2:30 p.m. That night, Victor and I met in his office to organize our evidence. The forged power of attorney. The notary commission records. The irregular transfers. Frederick's ledger with its careful, uncomfortable notations. Bank statements showing the structured movement of funds. Business registry records proving that receiving accounts were linked to family members. They've built their entire case on narrative, Victor said, arranging documents into presentation folders. They're expecting us to fight narrative with narrative, your word against theirs. I nodded, understanding the strategy. Instead, Victor continued, we're going to fight narrative with documentation. Every accusation they've made under oath, we can counter with a paper trail they didn't know we had. On August 12, I walked into the courthouse carrying a single leather briefcase containing 63 pages of evidence that would dismantle everything my family had claimed. They still thought they were winning. I was about to show them why silence had been my greatest weapon. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected, paneled in dark wood that absorbed sound and made every word feel weighted. Judge Eleanor Prescott sat behind an elevated bench, her expression neutral as she reviewed the case file. At 63, she had a reputation for patience with witnesses and zero tolerance for procedural games. Brennan opened with confidence, presenting his case exactly as I'd anticipated. He called Howard first, who testified about my alleged instability with the polished delivery of someone who'd rehearsed extensively. Then Margaret, describing Frederick's declining mental state and his supposed concerns about my judgment. Finally Clara, who painted a picture of a troubled younger brother who'd never quite found his footing in life. Each testimony was emotionally compelling, delivered with just enough detail to sound credible. They spoke about Thanksgiving dinners where I'd seemed withdrawn, phone calls where I'd been abrupt, business decisions they'd heard had gone poorly. Anecdotes, observations, family lore presented as evidence. Victor cross-examined minimally, asking only clarifying questions that seemed almost deferential. And these conversations with Frederick, they weren't recorded? These observations about Sebastian's behavior, you didn't document them at the time. These concerns about his mental state, you didn't seek professional evaluation? No. 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 After 3 hours of testimony, Judge Prescott leaned forward slightly. The courtroom fell silent. "Counselor Brennan," she said, her voice calm but precise, "I've listened to extensive testimony about Mr. Sebastian Hawthorne's alleged unfitness. Character observations, family concerns, historical incidents. But I need to ask directly, can any of your clients provide actual proof of these allegations? Documentation, financial records, professional evaluations, anything objectively verifiable that demonstrates current incompetence to manage estate affairs?" The question hung in the air like a blade. Brennan glanced at his clients, then back to the judge. "Your Honor, the testimony itself demonstrates a pattern of—" "I didn't ask about patterns of testimony, Counselor. I asked for proof." Brennan shuffled through papers, searching for something concrete. Howard leaned forward to whisper urgently. Margaret rifled through a folder. Clara's confident expression flickered with uncertainty. There was nothing. Not a single document, not a medical evaluation, not even a formal written complaint. Just stories. Judge Prescott turned to Victor. "Mr. Lane, does your client wish to present evidence?" "Yes, Your Honor." I stood, walked to the evidence table, and opened my briefcase. My hands were steady. "Your Honor," Victor began, "while the petitioners have offered narrative, we'd like to present documentation. Specifically, documentation that raises questions about the petitioner's own handling of the estate." I placed the forged power of attorney on the overhead projector. "This document," Victor continued, "purports to grant Clara Whitmore financial authority over Frederick Hawthorne's accounts, notarized in October 2022. He paused, letting the court reporter catch up. However, the notary's commission expired in June 2022, 4 months prior. This document is legally invalid. The courtroom energy shifted immediately. Judge Prescott leaned forward to examine the projection. Brennan stood, objecting, but his voice lacked conviction. "We have additional concerns," Victor said calmly. I placed the next document, bank statements highlighting the irregular withdrawals. Between September 2022 and January 2024, $127,500 was withdrawn from Frederick Hawthorne's accounts in irregular transactions. Each withdrawal occurred within 48 hours of visits by the petitioners. I added Frederick's calendar entries, the dates perfectly aligned. One by one, the reveals continued. The expired notary commission verification from the state database. The business registry showing that receiving accounts were linked to Margaret and Howard. Frederick's ledger entries with their careful, uncomfortable phrasing. The transfer patterns that demonstrated structured movement designed to obscure destinations. I didn't speak dramatically. I didn't accuse. I simply presented documents, each one contradicting a claim made under oath. Clara had testified that Frederick willingly gave her financial authority. The forged document proved otherwise. Howard had testified that Frederick was mentally confused. The ledger showed Frederick documenting every concerning transaction with clarity. Margaret had testified everything was done properly. The business records showed funds flowing to her dissolved company. Judge Prescott examined each document carefully, making notes, asking precise questions about dates and sources. The petitioners sat frozen, their confidence evaporating with each page. "Mr. Hawthorne," the judge said, addressing me directly for the first time, "how long have you been aware of these irregularities?" "Since April, Your Honor." "Approximately 2 weeks after the will reading." "And you chose not to make accusations until you had documentation?" Yes, Your Honor. In my profession, I learned that suspicion without evidence creates more problems than it solves. Judge Prescott nodded slowly, then turned to the petitioners. I'm going to ask you directly, Mrs. Whitmore, Mr. Hawthorne, Mrs. Sutton, were you aware that the power of attorney document was improperly notarized? Silence. Were you aware that transfers from the estate were being routed through business accounts registered to family members? More silence. Did any of you document Frederick Hawthorne's alleged mental incompetence with medical professionals? Clara finally spoke, her voice thin. We were trying to protect the family assets. By removing them? Judge Prescott's tone remained even, but the implication was clear. The judge closed the file in front of her. I'm going to recess for 30 minutes to review this evidence more thoroughly. We'll reconvene at 4:15. As she stood, the courtroom rose with her. The moment she disappeared through the door behind the bench, I heard Margaret's sharp intake of breath, Howard's muttered curse, Clara's frantic whisper to Brennan. Victor placed a hand on my shoulder. That question changed everything, he said quietly. I nodded, watching my family begin to understand what I'd known for months. The truth doesn't need volume. It just needs verification. Judge Prescott returned at exactly 4:15 p.m. The courtroom rose, but the energy had changed completely. Where my family had entered with confidence, they now sat rigid, avoiding eye contact with each other and with me. The judge settled into her chair and opened the file with deliberate care. I've reviewed the evidence presented by both parties, she began, her voice measured and clear. The petitioners have offered extensive testimony regarding Sebastian Hawthorne's alleged unfitness to serve as executor. However, testimony without corroboration is simply narrative. And narrative, no matter how compelling, cannot override documented fact. She looked directly at Howard, Margaret, and Clara. The evidence Mr. Hawthorne presented raises serious questions, not about his competence, but about the conduct of the petitioners themselves. A forged power of attorney. Irregular financial transfers. Structured movement of estate funds through accounts registered to family members. These are not minor discrepancies. These are indicators of potential fraud. Brennan stood. Your Honor, if I may. You may not, Counselor. I'm not finished. Judge Prescott's tone remained calm, but the authority behind it was absolute. The petitioners testified under oath that Frederick Hawthorne was mentally incompetent during the period when these transactions occurred. Yet the evidence shows he documented every concerning interaction with clarity and precision. Either he was competent and these transactions were unauthorized, or he was incompetent and the transactions constitute exploitation of a vulnerable adult. Either way, the petitioner's credibility is fundamentally compromised. She turned to me. Mr. Hawthorne, your appointment as executor is affirmed. Furthermore, I'm ordering a full forensic audit of all estate transactions from January 2022 forward. The petitioners are hereby ordered to provide complete financial records of any funds received from Frederick Hawthorne's accounts within 14 days. The gavel fell once, sharp and final. Additionally, I'm referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation of potential elder financial abuse and document fraud. This hearing is concluded. The courtroom remained silent as Judge Prescott gathered her files and departed. No one moved. No one spoke. The magnitude of what had just happened settled over the room like physical weight. My family's case hadn't just failed, it had exposed them. Howard was the first to stand, his face pale. He walked out without looking back. Margaret followed, her hands shaking as she gathered her belongings. Clara remained seated for several moments, staring at the table in front of her, before finally rising and leaving through the side door. Not one of them looked at me. Victor began packing our evidence folders. You understand what happens next? The DA's investigation, the audit, the potential criminal charges. I understand. And you're prepared for that? I thought about Frederick's ledger, those careful notations that had tried to maintain family peace while documenting uncomfortable truths. I thought about the months I'd spent in silence, watching people I'd known my entire life construct elaborate lies. I thought about the moment in that courtroom when a single question had dismantled everything they'd built. "I'm prepared," I said. There was no celebration. Victor shook my hand with professional warmth, congratulated me on the outcome, and reminded me we'd need to meet the following week to discuss the audit process. Then he left, and I was alone in the empty courtroom. I'd won. My reputation was restored, my brother's estate was protected, and the truth had been established beyond dispute. But victory felt nothing like I'd imagined. Betrayal by loved ones leaves a mark that vindication doesn't erase. I'd proven my competence, exposed their deception, and secured justice through methodical documentation. But I'd also lost the illusion of family, the belief that shared history and blood relationships meant something more fundamental than self-interest. The cost of truth, I realized, isn't just the effort required to uncover it. It's what you lose when you can no longer pretend otherwise. I gathered my briefcase and walked through the courthouse corridors, my footsteps echoing in the late afternoon emptiness. Outside, the August heat hit me immediately, the kind of thick Pennsylvania humidity that makes everything feel slightly unreal. No family waited on the courthouse steps. No one called to congratulate me or apologize or attempt reconciliation. I was completely alone, exactly as I'd been when I first discovered that unexplained withdrawal 4 months earlier. But the silence felt different now. In that courtroom, facing accusations from people I'd loved, I'd maintained silence as strategy, a deliberate choice to observe rather than react, to document rather than defend. That silence had been a form of weakness they'd mistaken for inability to respond. Now, walking away from the courthouse with my reputation intact and their credibility destroyed, silence had transformed into something else entirely. Authority. The lesson Frederick had tried to teach me through his meticulous record-keeping finally made complete sense. Justice isn't loud. It isn't dramatic. It doesn't require raised voices or emotional confrontation. Justice is methodical. It's documented. It's the quiet accumulation of facts that speak louder than any accusation. I reached my car, placed the briefcase in the passenger seat, and sat for a moment before starting the engine. The courthouse stood behind me, its granite facade unchanged by the small human drama that had just concluded within its walls. Somewhere in the city, my family was dealing with the consequences of their choices. Somewhere, the truth they'd tried to bury was beginning its methodical exposure through official channels and legal processes. And I was driving away, alone but vindicated, my illusions gone but my integrity intact. One question from a judge had changed everything. But it was the silence I'd maintained before that question, the patience, the documentation, the refusal to accuse without certainty, that had made the answer possible. I started the car and pulled into traffic, leaving the courthouse and everything it represented behind me. The room had finally gone quiet. And in that silence, I'd found exactly what I needed. If this story resonated with you, I invite you to follow for more narratives about resilience, truth, and the power of patience. Subscribe for weekly stories, and share this with someone navigating their own difficult family dynamics. Your support means everything.